Kayfabe Cards, your ultimate destinations for all things tabletop in Riverton, Utah. Uniting enthusiasts under one roof, we proudly showcase Flesh and Blood, Pokemon, Magic, Weiss, and One Piece, a gateway into an exhilarating universe of gaming. Immerse yourselves in our diverse products, including a very squishy array of Japanese plushies and the excitement of Gashapon machines. Our expansive play area invites you to duel in epic battles and forge unbreakable bonds with your fellow players. We open our doors every day at noon, embracing a realm where cards come alive and unforgettable moments are forged. Come join us at Kayfabe Cards.
This is the Instant Speed Podcast, episode number 108. 108 wonderful episodes, and I figured to commemorate this amazing episode milestone. I don't know why it's a milestone. I think it's just because there's a 1 and an 8 in there. Brodie, and you recently turned 18, so happy birthday, belated as such.
Thank you.
How long ago was that? When was your birthday, Brodie?
Yeah, my birthday was in late September 25th, and also 8 is my lucky number, so there's another good reason to celebrate the milestone of 108.
Hey, why did you land on 8 out of curiosity?
I don't really remember, honestly, what caused that to become my lucky number, but kind of all throughout my life I've used 8 and 88 in my usernames. And it is just my favorite number, period. But like definitely from 1 to 10, people ask me to pick a number randomly. It's usually 8. I really don't have a good explanation why, though.
I can name you like 17 different hockey players with those numbers if you want. So if anybody asks you, you'd be like, 8. Oh, that's Alex Ovechkin of the Washington Capitals, arguably one of the greatest goal scorers of all time. Oh, 88. That's one of the best American-born players. That's Patrick Kane, who just got traded to the Detroit Red Wings. Or it could be Eric Lindros. I can just go on and on and on, Brodie, for a thing that you know nothing about, which is the wonderful sport of hockey. But we're going to talk about something you know very much about, which is Flesh and Blood. And you are now, I don't know where you are, because you go from like event to event to event. So we're gonna live in the past a little bit, because we just got back from Columbus, where you won the Realm Rumble, the big culmination of the entire Realm circuit. Basically came to fruition this past weekend at the Convention Center in Columbus. You won that bad boy on Azalea. So congratulations, first of all. And I want to also, first of all, ask you, how did your weekend go outside of the Flesh and Blood aspect?
My weekend was fantastic. I was staying with Michael Fang, Michael Hamilton, and Roger Bodie. We were all staying together and hanging out. Got in Thursday night because the Rumble, the 20K started on Friday morning. And we were playing some Flesh and Blood throughout the weekend. Also played a board game called Everdell, which was a ton of fun. I had played it once or twice before, and it had kind of been a minute. But when I heard the guys talking about Everdell, I was like, wait, I think I've played that game before, and it was a ton of fun. I would love to play it again. So it was indeed the same game I was thinking of, and we got to play it again, I think, Friday night. So that was a great time. I'm hoping to play that game again with those guys. And yeah, I got to see a ton of friends. A lot of players traveled in for the Rumble from the Columbus area and from all over North America. So just like these Flesh and Blood events always are, it was fantastic to see everyone and hang out. And the team ended up doing really well overall throughout the weekend. We had 3 Wolfpack members in the top 8 of the 20K, and Michael Fang took down the 10K, so we had a lot to celebrate at the end of the weekend as well.
Most definitely. I mean, that house or that place that you guys were staying was essentially like this Champion Central, which was incredible. But just the peripheral aspects of this Flesh and Blood community, the competition was great, don't get me wrong. But what I like to see was the fact that, let's say, after the Friday or after the Saturday, you'll go to like the market area where there's like a lot of different restaurants and everybody's there. There's like, 30 or 40 people all just kind of hanging out, having a good time, eating together, playing games after the fact, going out, enjoying themselves. It was just a very amicable and uplifting scene. The money aside, the competition aside, there's no elo on the line. Everybody's there just to have a good time. And, would you have gone, out of curiosity, if this was like a 5K or a 2K or something like that? It's odd to ask you, Brodie, because you go everywhere, but I feel like the mystique of this event, how much of the attraction to going to this was the fact that it's just like a community gathering and, money aside?
Like you mentioned, for me personally, I definitely would have been there either way. It wasn't like the prize pool is not the main appeal for me, even though that's fantastic and it's great to compete for big prizes. But I think that for pretty much everybody in the Flesh and Blood community, it's both. Like, you start playing the game because you're interested in trying a new card game, and maybe because of the draw of competition and like earning prizes and the OP circuit, and then you stay for the fantastic community. And in my opinion, Flesh and Blood is one of the greatest communities I've ever witnessed or been a part of. It's so wholesome, everyone's so friendly, and I think the combination of so much to battle for provided by the realm and also just like pretty much guaranteed good times with friends, how can you pass that up, right? Like, it's both are amazing.
Well, let's talk about the actual, that carrot at the end of the stick, which is $20,000 being put up here for an invitational, which essentially at the end of the day, I believe it was 115 players or something like that, or around that level. There was over 100 players who showed up, and all of whom were there for a pretty significant deal, which was, again, $20K at the end of the line, which was a very top-heavy prize structure, which I thought was kind of cool. Like, everybody who made it to day 2, I think, got paid a decent amount. Like, it was like $200 or $250, something like that. But that didn't scale up as you go from 32 to 16. It was the top 8, and ultimately this heavy-weighted first place prize was unreal, and you took it down there, Big Daddy, which was awesome to see. Because Brodie, I gotta tell you, man, you won the first event in Chicago on Azalea, and I'm asking you this because was there any consideration in your mind where you're like, hey, it'd be kind of extra cool if I won this thing the same way that I won the inaugural one way back when?
That thought actually did cross my mind at the start of the weekend. At whatever point I decided to lock in Azalea, I had the thought of, like, back in March, I was also unsure of which hero to play, and I locked in Azalea, and that worked out quite well. And just like in the back of my head, I was like a little bit of deja vu, like it'd be a really cool full circle way to end it. And I am really happy I chose Azalea, not just because the game's ended up, working out in my favor, but I had a great time playing her. It was the deck I really wanted to play, I think, going in to the weekend. I was also having a lot of fun with Dash.io, but I just kind of like felt in my gut like Azalea was the right pick. And the fact that the year started with Azalea upon the release of Outsiders made the whole thing a lot cooler.
It was very cool. You played against a lot of very high quality players. Obviously, you had one match against Yuki Lee Bender in Swiss on camera, and then you got to play her again in the top 8. The games kind of went a little bit differently, but let's talk about the Swiss round, because this is the fact about this tournament that was extra alluring to watch. It was a post-Icelander ban fiesta. There was so many people walking into this, not just necessarily saying, I've got a beat on the meta. I know how it's going to shake out. I think that people brought these decks not necessarily because they thought they had secret information or they had locked down which way the winds were blowing. I think that a lot of people walked into this tournament with some ideas, but also just leaning on either innovating something new, trying it in this kind of hyper competitive environment, but also leaning on stuff that they were just very comfortable with. I mean, Yuki Lee Bender on Bolton, that is a connection I don't think anyone would have made in their mind. So she's coming in and she had immense success with that deck. But then again, on for example, for you, on Azalea, for other players just leaning on the decks that they're very comfortable with, did you find that this meta was more indicative of what people thought the right choices would be? Or did you think that this was more so something that people were just unsure of, so they kind of leaned on the pillars of what they knew, their favorite picks, their specialties?
I think there's probably a mix in there, which likely happens with every new meta like this. Some people are going to try to capitalize on the fact that it's an unexplored space and not everyone knows what the best pick is. And a lot of people will try to bring a deck that they think will counter the field, counter basically the existing field, but was bad into whatever just left or whatever the change was. Like, for example, Bolton is a deck that had a really rough Icelander matchup, and Icelander just left the format, and perhaps Bolton's matchup spread into the rest of like the world's meta minus Icelander is really good, and that's what brought Yuki to bring Bolton. I think we saw more Kanos than usual for maybe a similar reason. Like, the most prominent wizard has left CC. People are probably cutting down on Arcane Barrier or just overall disrespecting Wizard a little bit more right now, I have to imagine is what some of these Kanos were thinking. So that's like sort of a dark horse pick for this event. And then I think there are plenty of players who, in general, in Flesh and Blood, just specialize on one hero or class and feel the most comfortable bringing that. And even players who switch around some, kind of like you mentioned, probably in such an unknown meta where anything could be the right pick. It's for them, it's a no-brainer to just go back to what they know. And that was kind of where I ended up with Azalea for this event. There were several decks that I thought might be the best, and I didn't have time to come to any real conclusion on which one was. So for me, it just made sense to play one of the contenders that I also had a ton of experience on.
So now that you did go through that gauntlet, what was the most surprising deck that you knocked up against? Let's say you just sort of bumped up against this random deck. Like there were stories of people like, let's say Tommy Fresh at the 10K went 6-2 and just kind of slightly bubbled out of the top 8 on Riptide, which was unreal. And Riptide had this magical kind of ascent into prominence, or at least into relevancy, when it wasn't just a joke. People were actually getting gooned off of a deck that they just knew nothing about. But now that you went through it, was there one deck that you faced and you were like, "Ooh, okay, this is something I didn't have on my list. This wasn't on my tier A, my tier B." You know, was there something that surprised you throughout your rounds?
The two decks that come to mind are Boltyn and Levia. We already mentioned Yuki and her run on Boltyn. It was a deck that I had considered the week before. I thought people likely would be picking up Warriors a bit more post the LL of Icelander, but I really hadn't tested into Boltyn as Azalea at all. I think I've played some games of that matchup, but never really dedicated testing. So playing into Yuki, especially in Swiss, when it was kind of a total surprise, I had to think on my feet a bit and just like make sure I was extra careful and pay attention to like what all of her equipment did, try to figure out on the fly what her game plan was, how she approached the matchup, because I was so inexperienced with it. And then Levia as well is a deck that has been showing up quite a bit this year, especially after the support in Dusk Till Dawn. Ethan has been playing it at several events, and some of his teammates have been doing, he and his teammates have been doing quite well with the deck in recent months, several top 8 finishes. So it has been on my radar, but I did not expect Levia to be a super played deck this weekend. And I would not, if you asked me at the start of the weekend to predict what 8 heroes I expected to make to top 8, Levia probably wouldn't have been in that list. So that one was a little bit of a surprise to run into in the semifinals. I did prepare for it the night before because, of course, we knew like the top 8 players in the bracket. So I got a couple games into Levia just to make sure I knew what I was doing in the matchup. But yeah, those are the two that were probably the least expected for me that ended up doing super well.
Ethan Van Zandt, obviously the name associated with Levia, and what I love about those lists that he puts out there is that, yeah, there's sort of a base structure to it. There's a framework that you have to build around. The boundaries of the deck are what they are, and if you want to compete with it, you have to kind of follow a certain guideline. But he seemed to constantly re-innovate the hero. He had this tear limb from limb kind of Hydra, miracle Hail Mary, massive combo piece, but he managed to actually just continuously roll over opponents in a go tall, go wide, just never relent approach. And was that the scariest deck, let's say, that you saw? Was that Levia list? I mean, you practiced into it and such, but was there one list that you looked at and not maybe didn't surprise you, but you said this list has the potential to essentially define the meta moving forward?
I do think that that Ethan's Levia list is very good, to put it simply, and kind of innovative. I don't know how many of the new-ish cards are new to this weekend, or how many of them he's been playing a bit over the last couple months, because I haven't personally been working on Levia. But I know the night before when we were testing, we were like really impressed with some of his card choices, and like looking at his deck list, we could tell sort of what the plans were for some matchups, and I think he really is a master of that hero. So yeah, the Levia list is one that I could definitely see continue to have success into the future of this meta and next year. I think of all the top 8, as far as decks I was personally terrified of in that tournament, it was Michael Hamilton's Bravo deck, because that's just a bad matchup for my Azalea deck. But as far as kind of innovative deck lists that maybe will continue to define future metas to come in the near future. Once again, the Leviathan Bolton lists are what I would go to. Both of those are just kind of fresh on the scene.
There's a lot of people who have submitted questions. Many of them are sandwich related. Like, I'm just going to be completely honest with you. So I will get through some of the sillier ones. And no one out there. Do you know the Charmer rule, by the way? The Charmer rule of conversation? I don't
think I've heard this.
Okay, this is something that I have essentially. It's like this resistance, this carapace that I've essentially developed when I'm around him, which is essentially if you ask him a question, you immediately discount and not even consider his first response because it's usually riddled with sarcasm and stupidity. So literally, when I ask him a question, I'm like, "Hey, what time do we have to be there tomorrow?" I will just blank out. I will wait 5 seconds and then I will say, "Hey, what time do we have to be there tomorrow?" Because then he will give me the correct answer. So we'll lead off some of the sillier questions with one Derek Oswald, aka Charmer, who asks, "When is the ham/bread sponsorship coming? I want to eat some of the same superfoods that the pros do." And that is a consideration. I mean, people have been sponsored by sillier things out there, and I mean, if there's one thing that you're known for besides being a killer competitor and just a genuinely wonderful human being, it's that you eat sandwiches. Like, that's it. That's all you do is you eat ham sandwiches between rounds, and it's like, it's endearing, but at the same time, like, have you had a vegetable ever? Like, I guess that's something that has entered your body.
I do eat vegetables. I will say I hate pickles, but I actually like a lot of vegetables, raw or cooked. When I was younger, I really hated most cooked vegetables, and that has gotten better with time. But, you know, if MinMax Games wants to become MinMax Games and Sandwiches and sell sandwiches on the side, then boom. Sandwich sponsorship right there. I could see it. Next year, MinMax start churning out the ham.
That would be great. And they could actually put like their foot-long subs in like a long box, like a 500 count long box, and like ship it out that way. That would be actually pretty sweet. I worked at Subway for 6 terrible months. It's an awful place. But yeah, I'm on board. If they open a sandwich spot, I'll be first in line there to sort of submit my resume. But like, all jokes aside, if like Wonderbread approached you, would you just show up in kind of like a NASCAR jumpsuit with like Wonderbread all over it? Like, if that's something that you would do?
That would be hilarious and awesome. And I will say I would have to figure out a way to only get Wonderbread because it is my go-to. If the store I go to or like the city has Wonderbread that I can find, I will grab that. But like, for example, this latest weekend, we were eating Sara Lee bread because it's just what we could find. So Wonderbread would have to provide the jumpsuit and enough Wonderbread to go around. I haven't been able to find it everywhere.
That would be great. I just see you wheeling up with a pallet of bread and being like, "Giveaways for everyone. Fresh bread. Let's go." Okay. More questions coming in from MinMax Games themselves. Says, if James White asked you to design a hero, what would you want it to play like? That's a very good question for you, because you talk about, for you, Brodie, specifically, you have played and, dare I say, mastered so many of the heroes that are out there and that play in different ways, in different capacities, be it, you know, you've played Briar, you've played Lexi, you've played Azalea, you've gone tall, you've gone wide. But if you were to design a hero that speaks to you, and I know that I think you said Viserai was one of your favorite heroes ever, what would that hero design look like? And I don't mean class necessarily. I mean more so playstyle.
I think one of my favorite things about Viserai back in ProQuest Season 1 era, when we had Bloodchief Skeletor, was how transformative he was, being one of the fastest aggro decks, but also being able to sideboard into this defensive OTK package. So I think I would really like another hero like that can be super low to the ground, aggressive, kind of keep my whole hand and punch you style, but can either pivot in game or sideboard into a more combo-y defensive slow strategy. Any deck where in the same tournament I can feel like a fast aggro deck and a combo setup deck, that is, I think, the kind of hero that would really make me happy, and I would have a great time playing that.
Now, another good question here would be, wouldn't Dash be that? Wouldn't Dash, Inventor Extraordinaire, kind of fit into that mold that you're talking about? She can load up Teklo Pounder, boost her ass off, and just blow you out of the water, but at the same time, she can sort of sideboard pivot into this Plasma Purifier, pistol-based defensive build. Is that something that maybe you would say is as close to what you're talking about right now?
Yeah, I think in the current format, Dash is as close as it gets. And I played Dash at one Battle Hardened recently and really enjoyed that about her. And I think Bolton has that a little bit as well. He has two different game plans. Like the Yuki list, for example, this weekend played Raiden and then also played Sabers into some matchups, which is more all in on setting up for the combo. And I think the one thing about Dash is the aggressive plan is just like Viserai. It's a super fast aggro deck where you're trying to just push damage. But the more defensive plan that you sideboard into is a little bit more engine builder feel, which is still really cool, where you're like slowly developing your items, and then once you have them online, your turns get more and more efficient, and you just kind of like build this powerhouse of a board state where you just shoot your pistol several times for 4 every turn, and your resources become worth more than 1, and the longer the game goes on, the better it gets for you. I do think that's really cool, and I actually also like playing that style, but I think the thing I loved so much about OTK Viserai was it was like defensive setup, and then it all culminated in like one turn of huge pop-off. I think that's something that really speaks to me in card games. So if I could design a hero, I would want it to be more like that, where instead of building up an engine that gets stronger over time, it's kind of like dirtling and blocking and setting things up in play, and then eventually popping off in one big like fireworks conclusion, kind of like Kano.
That ProQuest season where it was like Starvo, Viserai, OTK was still around, etc. I remember how many Starvo games I'd play where the score was like 40-1, and they're like, okay, I'm ready to do something here. I'm like, yeah, you got a stack of like 50 rune chants. Of course you're ready to do something here. And like, you just sit there and wait and to just get blown out of the water. The amount of games where I'm like, I can't lose this. And then I'm like, wait, I absolutely can, where you just get airmailed this gigantic sort of package of rune chants that you're just being force fed. And you're like, okay, that might not appeal to many people out there, Brodie, but at the same time, I like the versatility of it. So that makes sense. That's a good answer. There's so many questions. I think you are one of the people out there that everybody wants to hear from, because you're so articulate and descriptive in how you answer questions. So we got a lot of them. So I hope you're ready for like this laundry list of questions. You ready to keep going?
Ready, let's do it.
All right. Well, yeah, we got a few out of the way. Let's speak to Mara Faris, the Empress herself. I had breakfast with Mara on the Monday morning, and it was wonderful to hear her. Even at breakfast, she is just so happy to be her. And I don't blame her. The best person out there, if you need an example on how to be confident, it's Mara Faris. She asks, Brodie has proven that he can dominate on any hero in the game, but if you could snap your fingers and choose one hero to instantly, completely master, which hero would it be? So you could take this two ways. It could either be like, hey, this is a hero I just don't get. I can't do it, so let's just shore that up. But maybe it's one where you're like, hey, I'm good at it, but I want to be the best at it. Is there one of those heroes that kind of speak to you?
I think it's cool that this question comes from Mara, because my genuine answer is Dromai. I think that Dromai is probably the hardest hero in CC. And it's a deck I've played before. I played it at Battle Hardened Chicago this year and the PTI event that same weekend. And I have studied it a fair bit. At one point, I played Dromai for a couple of weeks at Armories just to try to learn it. That was before Chicago. But I haven't delved too far into the deck. And I think that in general, Illusionists, to me, are the hardest decks to play and play against, because you have to go a step above just doing turn-to-turn flesh and blood math where you're trying to max the value of a hand, because when you're putting permanents on the board, it becomes a lot harder to evaluate what those are worth from a mathematical sense. Like your Asvalai, if unpopped, is going to attack for 3, and then at the very least take 3 damage from your opponent to kill it if you're not dying, basically, if you're not going to immediately die, in which case they can ignore the Azalea. So that, at the very least, is a 0 for 6 with Go Again, which is already way above rate. But it costs you an Ash to play it, so how much is the Ash worth? Mara will tell you Ash has no value, which makes sense. It's really hard to evaluate, and it's all contextual, but basically it's just very difficult to apply numbers to your decisions, which is something I try to do basically anytime I'm playing Flesh and Blood. So I just find it really, really hard and really cool to think about. So yeah, Dromai.
That's a very interesting sort of tangent that I maybe want to kind of explore with you a little bit here, of applying numbers and numerical values to strategies, decks, archetypes, cards specifically. That, to some degree, people will look at Flesh and Blood and say that is an element of the game that doesn't appeal to them, is the fact that, given the fact that variance is fairly limited and fairly small, that it comes down to just guaranteed numbers, that every card at the end of the day, my 60 cards that I am presenting in a particular match, the numerical value of every card is, let's say, the value of every card is going to be about 5.2 points or something like that. So they'll just say, I'll play this over the deck that's providing me 5.1 points per, and then it becomes that. Now, obviously, you know this, I know this. It's a lot. There's a lot more nuance to the game than just that. But do you feel like there's a certain amount of design space that could potentially be limited in Flesh and Blood because it comes down to a sheer amount of numbers? And I say this as a Bravo player, where it's like, okay, the card blocks for 3. It's oftentimes Bravo is very much a game of just evaluating numbers and saying, if I send 9 but take 8, I'm ahead. Things like that. Do you feel like Flesh and Blood might be painting itself into a corner when it comes to design space? Like, do you worry about the design latitude that the game may have to make it such that the decks are more than just those numbers?
I think if there's not enough interaction in the game, then what you're saying can become more and more real, where the deck that on average gets the most value per card is just always going to be best. But I think the state that the game is in right now is really cool, where some decks, when playing against a brick wall, have higher damage output, but then they have other weaknesses in maybe their ability to block or their vulnerability to particular disruptive effects. So in some matchups, they start to fall behind, and they aren't just de facto best deck. And I don't think any deck is just an unchecked numbers deck, which is why the system works. And in practice, bigger number isn't just like immediately best, basically. In deck choice and deck building, there's a lot of nuance to it. And I think one of the coolest parts of making decisions in Flesh and Blood is figuring out when it's correct to ignore the math, because of some other axis of thinking you have to consider that maybe isn't immediately apparent. But for example, fatigue is something that comes up, or your opponent's ability to like pop off next turn being so important to disrupt that you go for a lower value play that maybe forces them to block, because their cards are worth so much more attacking than blocking that it's worth it for you to go minus as long as you're forcing them to block, because now you're actually getting a bigger overall number when you consider both decks. There's just like all these different things you have to think about when it's not just you in a game, but you also have an opponent who's playing their own unique strategy. Using Bravo as an example, Bravo is one of the most every card is worth 3, quote unquote, decks, where most cards block for 3. Most of your attacks are on rate, meaning that they just like follow the base rate of at red, 3 cost equals 7 attack, 4 cost equals 8 attack. There's not that much stuff that's breaking rate, but you have a lot of armor. So you're better into decks that have a lot of on-hit effects, and that's how they generate their value, because it's a lot harder for them to force their on-hit effects through when you have so much gear to just cash in for that. And then you also have the dominate hero power, and you have crush effects. So decks that are extremely fast but have a lot of 2 blocks, so can't cover up your crush well, are particularly vulnerable. Like Chokeslam, for example, at its base is just a vanilla 4 for 8, block 3, it just normal Flesh and Blood rate, but the crush says your opponent's attack action cards can't gain power from effects. So at its base, that's worth 0. But versus some decks, like Azalea, for example, if you dominate that and they can't block it, now my 3 pumps in hand that were going to be worth 9, with maybe some added on hit value, just went to 0. So I think like because of all these cool interactive elements in the game and the way that there are kind of checks and balances between different decks and everyone has vulnerabilities, I think that keeps the math in check, and often the strategies that have the highest value ceiling when left alone and undisrupted tend to be the most vulnerable to disruption, and it all works out. And so, to answer your question, yes, I think that it's possible that if the designers didn't continue to build those interactions in the game, that it could become too numbers based. But I think the way it has been, and the way it is right now, and the direction it's going, it works because of all the nuance and interaction.
So you started this game, I think it was just post Aria, was it?
Yeah, it was December of 2021, in the middle of Tales of Aria, right after like the national champ season that year.
So we're literally approaching your 2-year anniversary in the game, correct? Okay. So
Yeah.
you are currently aligned, obviously, with the Wolfpack. You've got your min-max sponsorship and representing a wonderful ambassador, not just for the game, but for them as well. The Brodie of 2 years ago versus the Brodie of today, you were always a great player, but you have clearly ascended to this, this other echelon of elite in terms of skill set and whatever. I say whatever, like I just sweep it under the rug. You know what I'm talking about. I'm not trying to diminish your accomplishments here. But the evolution of Brodie Spurlock has been one of personal growth, but also growth within a team environment, growth within the community, growth and confidence in yourself and such. And I want to ask you, what is the difference that you particularly are very aware of and proud of that you can tell us about from the Brodie that entered his first tournament, when I met you 2 years ago, to the Brodie of today who is, fan favorite, community champion, absolute just murderer on the competitive scene, but like you're the dude who pulls the lever on the electric chair and smiles and waves and says have a nice trip, like, and everybody's like, yeah, this is gonna be great. It's I just got dummied by Brodie, like, and I feel great about it. What is that evolution like? What are you most proud of? What are the differences of 2021 Brodie to today Brodie?
First of all, some of the connections and friends that I've made since then have helped me a lot to grow as a player and person. I'm now on my team, the Wolfpack, which is a great group of people and really helps me prepare on the, like grinding practice matchups, all the limited format side of things. And then the other big thing for me that I would point to as my main point of improvement and kind of, I guess, like reason that I have continued to succeed and am able to find success at these tournaments is like the process and the mental game, basically. I think I've gotten so much better at keeping my emotions and pressure and everything in check while playing tournaments. It's really easy to get stressed out at how important a win or loss is in a given game, or how much it would mean to you to win that day. And now I think I have really gotten to the point where every time I'm playing Flesh and Blood, I'm just there to enjoy the game. And particularly something that I've struggled with is day 3 top cuts at US Nats in 2022 and at Pro Tour Baltimore this year. I think having all night to kind of slowly let it seep in, like how big a deal it was for me to be in that top 8 and what it could mean to win or lose the next day, even though I tried to put it out of my mind, I think in the back of my head it affected me a little bit and affected my play. And just this weekend at the Realm Rumble, I think I finally had a Sunday top cut situation where the stakes still felt incredibly high, but I really just put that out of my mind and focused on enjoying the game. And in that moment, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about, I'm having a good time. I'm searching for the right line because I love searching for the right line. That's why I'm here playing the game. My opponent and I are enjoying it, and just really trying to get into that headspace. I think that's the main thing that I've made a lot of improvement in over the last 2 years, and what helps me to succeed when I'm in these high pressure situations.
That's awesome to hear, and it's just incredible that you can just say like, "Hey, I'm playing for my share of $20,000 tomorrow." We can just put that aside, and it's just any other game. But a lot of that has to come with the fact that you've been in these high leverage situations. So, the Brodie of 2021 who's playing in a top 8 of Battle Hardened or whatever, to the Brodie of today, what advice would you go back and kind of whisper in your own ear, back then? Like you just, for example, that Saturday night, knowing that you've got to wake up at whatever time because you've got a 9 a.m. round one situation where you're every win or loss is thousands of dollars out of your pocket. What are you telling that Brodie that is waiting for that same situation 2 years ago?
Have fun. Those 2 words, I think, are the best advice I can give, because I have found in some of the most high pressure situations, I will pause in a game and realize that I'm almost not having fun. And the whole reason I'm there is because I love the game, and it's the most fun that I have doing anything in the world. That's why I travel every weekend to play it, and have pretty much devoted my life to trying to get better and learn everything I can about the game and the players who are good at it, and what it takes to succeed at tournaments. And despite all of that passion and love, I'm there at like the pinnacle of what I enjoy. And if I'm feeling more stressed than fun, that's like such a bad sign. And I find that it when that happened, I would always be doing the worst in my games. Almost like I am just ready for it to be over because of how much pressure I was putting on myself. And that's the main thing that I think I've gotten better at. And I just like remind myself, even when it's really easy to focus more on the prizes and the glory that would come with winning than this particular game of Flesh and Blood, I'm there playing because I love the game of Flesh and Blood. And I just try to disconnect the two and focus on the game, and have fun doing it. That's why we're playing.
One day, Brodie, I wish to grow up and be like you. I wish I could have that level of maturity and such, because I don't play at high stakes as much as I wish I could. And when I do go on a little bit of a heater and I'm kind of like playing well, I can't just have fun. It's just, I try my best, and I try to make, I've always been the person where when I'm playing across from somebody, they are usually the intimidated one, and I try to make light of things. But when I sort of have a good run and I'm playing against high level players, I'm usually the one where I'm like, I cannot enjoy this like I would if I was X2. This game would feel like nothing, but I'm XO, and I'm like, I'm going for a 4-0 here, and like that is something that I'm it's a very difficult to have fun aspect. I always have fun, but like oftentimes it's just, I'm like, I'll leave the window open this much for fun. The rest of it is just going to be sheer terrifying anxiety. But hearing those words, Brodie, are important, and I'm glad that you were able to sort of come to that conclusion that, at the end of the day, it's a game, and we're here to have fun. And there's a lot of people out there who want to win, but if you're doing so at the expense of the entire experience, then it's work. Then it's like your hours are probably better served, doing a day job or working on the weekends and such. You'll probably have more value out of it there. The Wolfpack that you're now associated with, first thing I want to ask you is, in 10 seconds, how many Wolfpack members can you name? Are you ready to play?
Oh boy,
all right.
I can do it. Do I have to? I don't. Even if I had them all on a list in front of me, it might be difficult to get them all.
I know that. Trust me, this is an unwinnable. You can't. There's no winner here. You're not going to name them all unless you're like you have Eminem levels of spitting rhymes at that speed. Are you ready to go? As many as you can in 10 seconds.
Let's do it.
All right. Let me see. I got to put a clock up here. I want to make sure that I get this correctly. Screw it. We'll just guess. All right. Ready to go? Here we go. 3, 2, 1, go.
Travis, Ryan, Nick, Zach, Tim, Michael, Roger, Ben, Luke, John, Brodie,
and you're done.
Did I already say?
How many was that? I don't even know. How many are
I think
left?
I got 12 or so.
Yeah, how many are left? That's the question.
There's like 8 left. Who did I not get? Ian, Eric, There's more. There's more. Who did I already name? Matt, I didn't name yet.
Somebody's left out there. Somebody's listening to this right now being like, Brodie, you son of a bitch, you better say my name.
Oh, I haven't named Dave, Mark, Mara. Ryan, I think I said Ryan, but not Brian.
You're like, you literally named, I'm pretty sure you had like the apostles in there. You had like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You named all the Beatles, I think. The Ninja Turtles were thrown in there. Yeah, I mean, like, the way I say this is because I always like to poke fun at the fact that the Wolfpack is like this massive crew, and they're all great people. Don't get me wrong here, and it's funny because I like to tweet out little jabs at the fact that your team is enormous, and I was like, I hope Zach knows that I'm kidding, and Zach messaged me privately. He's like, dude, these are hilarious. I was like, okay, I was just worried that, like, you know, I'm not trying to. He's like, no, this is amazing. And I got to draft at the Realm. They had an alpha draft, and I was there, and he was my left seat, and it was my first experience playing around Zach, and Zach's such a cool dude, and he was just. That's the one thing that, like, me personally, I regret about these events is that I don't get to be there playing and enjoying, you know, the side events and such. I'm usually locked away in my little booth dungeon there, but this was an event after the fact on the Saturday evening where I got to play, and it just felt good, and it felt great, and I love Zach because he made me feel like I was one of the pros. Like, we were just there, a table of 8 people having a good time, and, you know, now's your time to suck up to the boss if you want to.
Zach genuinely is an incredible leader on the Wolfpack. He doesn't like, you know, claim the title of team captain or anything like that, but he is our leader, in the sense that he does a lot of the organization, kind of leading the team meetings, making sure that before events everyone is where they need to be, checking in on people, like, can the team, you know, I haven't checked in with you lately, like, is there anything you really are needing to prep for this event, and we can kind of try to organize the team to help you get that. Just, you know, being the leader of our family and making sure everyone's having a good time and on the same page. We all really appreciate him, and he's a fantastic teammate. By the way, also, I believe Andrew and Nathan are the 2 people that I did not yet name, so I just need to get them in there so everyone is said. Also, shout out to Steven and Donovan, 2 of our part-time pack members. I believe that is the entire Wolfpack. If I have missed anyone now, you're allowed to be mad at me, because I believe that is it.
I wish to be an honorary Wolfpack member. That's it. I'm not going to ruin your stats. I'm not going to compete. I just want to be part of a team. That's all I want. I just want to be part of a crew. I want to just be considered as a potentially as a mascot. Oh, did you forget one again?
I forgot one name. It's our honorary pack member, Flake.
Oh, you son of a... Brodie, I love you, man. I don't know how to just explain it. We're going to get through a couple more questions, and then I want to talk a little bit about broadcasting. But we're going to go with one from Dagan. Dagan White, good friend. As someone who travels all over the world to compete in events, how do you combat the mental/physical fatigue that comes with changing sleep schedules and time zones and just travel in general? That's a very good question.
It is hard. Right now, I'm going the hardest I've ever gone. The Realm Rumble this weekend was my 9th traveling tournament weekend in a row, and I'm going to Battlehardened Orlando this coming weekend, which is going to be the 10th. And I'll be done for the year. But I've never done that many in a row before, and several of them have been overseas, like back and forth from Europe and Australia, and then coming home to the States. It really is a lot. There's a lot of time spent on planes, and the jet lag, time zones throwing you off. It does get to be exhausting, and it is, I think, unrealistic not to bring up the fact that I am still young, and I think that genuinely just is helpful. But I think there are a lot of things that I've been trying to do to also help me deal with it better. 3 of the things that I've been trying to really prioritize this year, and I'm putting at the absolute forefront of my focus for next year, are sleep, exercise, and food. Just because the more I play Flesh and Blood and the more I pay attention to how I'm doing, I feel like those things really affect my tournament performance. and I'm trying to pretty much devote my whole life, not actually my whole life, because I want to still maintain relationships with people outside of Flesh and Blood. I'm still doing school, but all of my free time where it's just like my time to explore my passions, I'm trying to do everything I can to just become the best Flesh and Blood player I can be. And at a certain point, I think that prioritizing these things starts to get me a lot more equity than grinding a couple more hours testing. So getting good sleep, getting 8 hours of sleep a night, trying to do that at the same time every night, even though with jet lag that's impossible, or jet lag and like, flying to a different time zone. Europe is like 7 hours ahead. You're going to be sleeping 7 hours later. That's unavoidable for the most part because the tournaments start at the local time. But eating better, eating healthy, and then for me the biggest one is exercise. I have found that when I'm prioritizing exercise, I've been going on runs recently, just like at home, that I do better in tournaments. I also play tennis. Whatever it is for you, I think that that is genuinely something that helps you combat kind of the tournament fatigue in a single weekend, and also just travel fatigue and exhaustion that can come with playing several events all clumped together. These things are becoming bigger and bigger priorities for me.
That's a good advice there. I know that Dagan travels a lot for these events as well, but yeah, you're right. Age is a factor, dude. I'm telling you, because I have been traveling like a madman as well, and the bounce back effect is not the same as when I was like in my early 20s. It ain't gonna happen. So yeah, just ride that wave, buddy. But you're right. I mean, exercise and sleep are imperative to this. Another question here. I'm gonna pair two together, mainly because they kind of mention the same kind of thing. So Fidir Kokan and Dedel both asking you about Warmonger's diplomacy in different capacities. Basically, Fidir saying, what's your take on the current metagame and CC becoming more random with cards like Warmongers? Random's a very dangerous word to use, but I'll respect the question for sure. And Dedel asking essentially, how do you behave if players, on Azalea, like with you on Azalea, are coming into the match against a hero that uses, or how do you behave when you're coming into a match against a hero that's going to use Warmongers against you? So give us a little bit about your, I guess, from an Azalea specific perspective, how to approach Warmongers in your opponent's list. And the other thing is, I guess, just your opinion of Warmongers in general.
So from an Azalea perspective, this is probably the single scariest card to exist in the metagame, especially because it's a generic, and a lot of heroes can beat you up with it. My personal approach in Azalea is to basically try to make all of my turns where I'm not getting Warmongers stronger, bigger, better, and accept that sometimes, probably about once per game, I'm just going to get wrecked by it, and hope that it balances out and that my deck is good enough that I can win through that. I know some Azalea lists are favoring more generic attacks lately to be able to play kind of like their whole hand through Warmongers, like Enlighten Strike, also CNCs. Just they give you more things that you can do when you're under the effects of this card. I do still play Ravenous Rabble as a way to get multiple attacks in when your opponent Warmongers you, and Rain Razors is basically the only pump in Azalea that you can play under the effect of Warmongers because it's an instant. But ultimately, I think you have to be aware of it, and sometimes your opponents will play in a way that suggests to you that maybe they have it in their hand, and at that point you can start to be a little bit more blocky. Try not to keep your whole hand so that you don't get as blown out by it. But honestly, my philosophy usually is to kind of play as if Warmongers doesn't exist, because in doing so, I'm making my deck list stronger, and I'm making my average turn more powerful every time they don't have it. And then on average, the one time per game that they have it, I'm just going to pass with 3 cards in my hand, and I'm going to take a huge, I'm going to fall on the back foot a lot, a huge hit from that. But I found that I have been able to win a lot of those games anyway, if it only happens once. I will say, if that happens twice, where your opponent Warmongers you and you're holding a 5-card hand with 3 or 4 pumps, and you have to pass with all of them in your hand, that's almost definitely doomed. But with 3 Warmongers in their deck, especially in these fast matchups like Ninja, hopefully they're only going to find at most one. And I think you can win through it.
Nice. You think that Warmongers is kind of like the worst thing since, dare I say, Codex, and dare I say Tome of Imperial Flame, so to speak? I mean, the Speedy Awards, the voting wrapped up, and I don't want to give away any of the spoilers, but those were the top 3 cards, obviously, that people hate the most. So I'm just curious if you share that that negative opinion of a card like Warmongers with Diplomacy.
Personally, Warmongers has my vote just because it beats up all the heroes that I like, being like Runeblades and Azalea and Dash.io. It's good into all of those. As far as how I feel about the card being in the game, period, it is very easy to include in some decks because it's a blue generic block 3. And people have argued that that is too good of a floor for a card that can have such an impact. Especially in heroes like Ninja, where it fits so easily into what they're doing, and it's like a pretty small cost for them to play it. And I think that's a fair argument. I think that it is kind of crazy good in some matchups, like versus Azalea. But with that said, I do think, for me, it's made the game more interesting that Warmongers exists. It gives me a lot of things to think about. There are ways to combat it in your deck list. I kind of just talked about how in Azalea I'm choosing not to do most of those things, but especially with some other heroes, it just gives you more to think about when building your deck, and when playing, it kind of allows for these really interesting situations where you have to kind of hedge how, I don't want to say how greedy you're being, but how many cards you're trying to hang on to play out your full turn if you think your opponent has a Warmongers. So it's a really interesting card. I enjoy games where I have to think about it. I do think it has quite a high ceiling, and I wish it weren't so impactful in some spots where it kind of acts as like an uninteractable Retina Ledger almost. So I'm somewhere in the middle. I don't think that it's necessarily bad that this card got printed, but it has some interactions that are kind of feels bad because it just has so much reach against some heroes and can be slotted into decks where it doesn't really hurt that deck at all.
So I want to pivot a little bit here to broadcasting, because that is something that you just are constantly wanting to do during the tournaments. If you don't make top 8, we love to have you in the booth. It brings me a lot of joy to see not just your enthusiasm for it, but also the fact that you're just very good at it. Question coming in from Clark Jansen, who asks, ask Brodie to explain why he plays so slowly sometimes, but when you're commentating, you're able to diagnose the board and identify optimal plays incredibly quickly. And I have my theories on this. Obviously, you're going to answer this question, but why is it that when you're playing, it's almost like you're playing at, the pace in which you're playing and executing your plays versus how you're analyzing them at the desk are like two different worlds?
Yeah, so when commentating, I try to break down the board as best as possible and kind of explain some of the thoughts that might be going on in the players' minds. But there's no consequence for basically just going with my first instinct. I'm like, this is what's likely going on. This is what might be in their hand. And usually it's close enough, or like it's a 85% to be on the right track. Something along those lines. Like, just it's a reasonable assumption, and I just want to break it down quickly to follow the game and not have dead space where, like, as a commentator, I'm just thinking when I'm supposed to be explaining or covering, like, following what's going on. But as a player, even though usually on turns there's a first gut instinct for what the play probably is, I really like to think through every possible line. That doesn't always mean every possible line. Like, there are some assumptions you make. In general, if I'm playing an aggro matchup where my opponent's not presenting on-hit effects this turn, and I know I'm going to be able to fire an arrow, I'm not considering blocking with my Lace with Bloodrot. There's no reason to. It's worth 3 on offense plus additional value. It's worth 2 on defense. So I'm not actually thinking about literally every possible permutation, but I do try to consider all of the lines that might be reasonable to take, even if at first glance they seem wrong, because I find that like 1 to 2% of the time, there's something about the situation that I notice 30 seconds into thinking about it that leads me to take an unorthodox play that usually wouldn't make sense, but in this particular spot is the best line. And in Azalea, for example, a lot of times you have multiple options. Like when you have Knock the Death Whistle in your hand, this came up with Viscerai sort of as well with Become the Arknight. From a pure math perspective, playing Knock the Death Whistle is bad because you're spending a full card, and the card you're getting is going on top of your deck, not in your hand. So you're basically just giving up a card when you could have used it to block 3 or pitch 3. But in some situations, the arrow that you're going to fetch and put on top has an on-hit effect that's so powerful it's going to make up for spending a card, hopefully even more than make up for that. Or the fact that you're dominating and you're trapping cards in your opponent's hand is going to do that, or both. So there's just like, I have to decide, like, is dominating and forcing through an on-hit going to give me more value than just pitching this knock to death dealer? And in that case, I'm drawing an extra card, so playing knock is giving up like 5 points or like 2 cards or something. So a lot of times I don't want to do it, but then in Red and the Ledger matchups, the heuristic often actually is to just fire off a knock and get the Red and the Ledger if you have like an inertia effect, because you're going to trap hopefully 3 cards in your opponent, or 2 cards in your opponent's hand and 1 card in their arsenal, and all of those are going to go away. So you're getting 3 extra cards from the Red and the Ledger effect. So it's worth it to go -1 or maybe between 1 and 2 cards to play the knock. Basically all of this to say, I just don't want to go too fast and realize later that it was a weird spot where an unassuming line would have actually made sense when I'm playing, and I double check everything. And sometimes I'm also trying to hold information in my head, and so I'm pausing, trying to like recall that and just make sure I'm on top of everything and not losing any of the information. The short answer is, when I'm commentating, there is no consequence for going with my first instinct, and when I'm playing, that could, be the difference between winning and losing the game.
Makes sense to me. I love it. Again, the perspective I'm in, it's the same way. Like at the same time, I'm like, I can identify it. I have to fill the dead air, right? So I have to come up with a quick analysis. But at the same time, the stakes for me being wrong or suboptimal are not the same as if I were at a table in a high leverage game, where if I just immediately snap a decision off on a play and then realize later, like, damn, I missed out on a couple points, or I could have done this differently. Taking the extra time is kind of important. But let me ask you this then, because again, and I say this not as criticism, but you do take a significant chunk of game clock whenever it's up to you. Do you feel that each player is entitled to their half of the game clock? Do you feel like there are heroes that are entitled to more or less? And the other question, the follow-up there, is how aware of you at all times are you of the game clock?
I have become extremely aware of time, partly because I never want to go to time. I never want to hit a draw in Swiss, and partly because of what you just mentioned. I want to be conscious of if I'm being fair to my opponent with time, basically. And I think the answer to what portion of the clock is each player in the game entitled to can be contextual. The easiest answer is half, is 25 of the 50 minutes, assuming the first 5 of 55 are used for sideboarding. In some games, it is true, especially in fatigue situations, that the fatigue player is probably going to take 10 of those minutes, and the other player is probably going to take 40, and that's all the time that both of them need to make the right plays. So I think the best way to put it into words is each player should ideally have enough time that they never have to rush because they're worried about going to time. Which in reality, sometimes both players are going to have to play faster because there's a game clock, but you should never be, especially the player who is currently taking less of the total clock should never be put in a spot where they don't get to fully think out their turn, because it's like, we're going to go to time if I don't play, I need to just block, and then that becomes unfair to them. And that is something that I think about. In Top Cut, I will pretty much just like take all the time I need to make sure I find the right play, because the rounds are on time, and it can't be like an unreasonable, like truly unreasonable log of just like spinning wheels when there are no wheels left to spin. But oftentimes I feel like I will take a couple minutes on a decision, and the whole time is filled with like genuinely going through like different thoughts and ideas, and checking different lines of play. And in a Top Cut situation with no timer, I feel like that's okay. But in Swiss, I have had games where at the end of the game, we finished in time, but I feel like I overstepped and took long enough on my decisions that my opponent got less than half the clock, and they had to play faster than they otherwise would have needed to, because they were worried we were going to go to time. And those things I do think about, and I try to dial back, and I don't want to be taking so much time that it makes it unfair to my opponent.
Makes sense to me. And last question from Hamal, our good friend Hamal, asking, what is the ham of choice for maximizing the ability to pitch stack? Is it smoked ham, black pepper ham, applewood ham? I'm a turkey guy. So you and I are on completely different hemispheres here. Smoked turkey to me is one of my favorite things. I went through 5 years of my corporate life eating a turkey sandwich every day, to the ridicule of many at the office. Felt great about it. Don't care. But what is the ham meta? Like do you approach it differently? Do you just have your like, no, this is it, man. Like, we go Bravo, we block, and it's cooked ham all day long.
I don't always manage to find it, but my go-to is, I think it's uncured Black Forest ham. That's what I look for in the grocery store. That's the ham meta.
I like it. I mean, for all those listening, do not send Brodie ham. Do not bring him ham. It's a weird thing to do, to bring somebody a perishable meat. So don't do that. Let the boy cook on his own. He's got it all figured out. That's what matters. Brodie, you're always
I recommend buying your own S-tier Black Forest ham, though, and bringing sandwiches for yourself to tournaments. I genuinely think, besides the fact that I like to eat them for lunch, I genuinely think it helps to stay fed during the day.
Well, when Michael Hamilton got knocked out of the tournament this past weekend, I think you gave him a sandwich, and then we're like, the dude's just gonna go win the next 3. Like that like there is an actual sandwich power up. It's like Super Mario just having his power, his mushroom, and then it just growing to like. You have essentially giving him the power star. Like, that's what you do. He is invulnerable for the next tournament or so.
He was eating sandwiches kind of the whole weekend. I've been, I guess, kind of rubbing off on some of my teammates and friends, especially when they're staying with me. In Barcelona, we were staying in an Airbnb, and my mom was like, oh, like, I'm going to go to the store and try to get sandwich stuff. Does anyone else want any? And we actually had like a little like sandwich order form for the team. There's like, everyone put in like what you want for your sandwiches. And not everyone else eats just ham and bread like me, but like in the hotel room this weekend, Michael Fang and Michael Hamilton both ate a couple sandwiches a day. And just saying, Michael Hamilton ate 2 per day, and he made top 8 of the 20K. Michael Fang ate 3 per day. He won the 10K, and I ate like 6 per day. I think it was more like 5, but there's a correlation here.
Yeah, no, this is like a statistician's dream. Like, yeah, all those people who kind of like to skew numbers and do all kinds of weird inferences off of like data. This is it. More sandwiches equals more power. It's just basically, it is written by now. I wish that there was like a Brodie Spurlock subscription service where I can just pay you like $20 a month, and every event that we're at together, I'm entitled to like 3 sandwiches and 2 water bottles. Like, I would love to have that. So if that is an option, Brodie, like, I would love to have that kind of sort of Brodie sandwich supply service at whatever the next event is. I don't know what that will be, where we'll be together, possibly in Queenstown, but I don't know if I want to bother you making me sandwiches when you're in Queenstown.
That would be hilarious. It's just like a sandwich ordering Patreon. Like, you
laugh, man. But That
You get the one
yeah.
the one ham tier, the 2 ham tier, and then if you're crazy, you can get the triple ham tier, which I only save for special occasions, and you get bread, ham bread, the secret recipe. That would be good.
Oh man, well, that's kind of. Have you ever felt like, you know what, I'm gonna throw a third slice of ham, or dare I say mustard, on a sandwich just to change things up? Like how reckless do you get, Brodie? You're 18 now,
Never
man.
mustard.
No, never mustard.
Never. But I have had the triple ham before. Sometimes the slices of ham are just small enough that it makes sense. Occasionally it'll usually be because like the ham that I bought for the weekend is like running out, and there's enough ham left to make 4 sandwiches, and then there's one slice left over. So I'm like, one of these sandwiches is the lucky triple, and we put it in there, and then I don't even know which one it is in my bag, but at some point in the day I get like a special bonus power up.
It's like the cold foil. It's like it's sealed in the pack. Like, you don't. It's in the, you bust it out. You never know where you get it. Everyone's drafting sandwiches. It's like, I got it. Woo! Everyone cheers. Brodie, thank you so much again, as always, for being on the show. Congratulations on your ongoing success, most recently winning the 20K at the Realm Rumble this past weekend in Columbus. The Tier 3 Patreon exclusive this week isn't Brodie Spurlock. It's Charlotte Spurlock, your mom. And I'm very excited for this, Brodie. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little switcheroo, Brodie. You're going to step out. I'm going to talk to your mom for about 10, 15 minutes, and then you're going to jump back in. Is that cool?
That sounds good.
All right, cool. We have returned with Brodie. Brodie, I don't mean to break it to you, but in our Tier 3 exclusive content discussion with your mom, she has offered to include me in the sandwich making procedure of your tournament experience. So I might not be on Team Wolfpack, but damn it, I am on the best team ever, which is the Brodie's Mom Makes Me Sandwiches team, which is pretty damn good, not going to lie.
Team sandwiches, let's go.
So
That's great. Yeah.
Any parting shots here, Brodie? I mean, like, again, you're somebody who I would have on the show all the time, and like the last little bit I want to get at, even before the parting shots, is when is it right for you? Because I know you want to do casting, and you're very good at it, and this is something that I would love more than anything than to share a booth with you for years to come. But when do you feel it's going to be right for you to make that transition? And do you think you'll ever love being in the booth more than you would be being at, like, playing for a win-in in round 14 or something?
I will say I do love being in the booth. When I did that first full day of casting at Battle Hard in Cincinnati this year, I really enjoyed it. I was on for 10 rounds that day, and it does get really tiring, but it was so much fun. I don't think that I will ever love it more than competing. And right now, I don't know if this will change in the future, but right now I don't see myself ever making a transition from career competitor to career caster. I could see taking some events off to do commentating instead, or especially in like Top Cup situations once I'm already dead, hopping in the booth and casting some of the final matches of the tournament. I've done some of that already, and I think that's a ton of fun. I don't think I'll ever get to a point where I would rather cast Worlds than play Worlds, though, at least right now.
Makes sense, my friend. Keep winning. Just keep doing what you're doing. Everybody loves you, buddy, and for rightfully so. You represent some of the best elements of what Flesh and Blood is meant to be, and you are going to be in Queenstown with me, and that's going to be pretty damn awesome. I get to spend some time with Brodie halfway across the world. Do I get a sandwich? That's the question. I would love a Brodie-made sandwich.
Team sandwiches, you know it. I will be bringing you a sandwich in Queenstown. I'm so excited for that event. It's going to be amazing.
Well, we'll talk about it as the weeks and such progress towards that. We're a little over a month away from it, but I'm telling you, Brodie, I mean, it has always been a dream to go to New Zealand, and to be there in a Flesh and Blood environment with good people means the world to me, and as do you. I say this to you all the time, buddy. When I see you, I do truly mean it. I love you, man. You're just a great person, and thank you again for doing the show. Yeah,
thanks so much for having me on. I've had a great time talking, and I will see you and everyone soon.
Damn right. Brodie, whatever the event is, he's there. So don't even worry about it. He will be there. Brodie, if anybody wants to sort of get some of your musings, Twitter, Discord, or contact you in any way, what is the best way to do so?
Yeah, I am at Brodie Spurlock on Twitter. My direct messages there, I believe, are all open. So if you have any questions, you can always message me there. That's the main place to find me on the internet.
Perfect. Beauty. All right, friends. Well, I want to give a big shout out again, obviously, to our sponsors at Kayfabe Cards. You can go to kayfabecards.com. You could be who you want to be at Kayfabe Cards. You could be a Wolfpack member, even. No, probably not. But there's a good chance that you already are, because they're huge. That is a joke. I love you, Zach Bunn. Aside from that, a big love again to our sponsors, Kayfabe Cards, and to you, our Patreon members. If you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/instantspeed. For as low as $2 a month, you could just be like, hey, Flake, thanks for just doing stuff. Thanks for just being there and running your mouth. I love you all, and yeah. It's been one hell of a weekend. I'm so glad that I get to rest. I don't think you do because you're going to Orlando, but I get to rest for a couple weeks and call it a day. But I do also want to remind people that the Speedy Awards, though the voting has closed, keep in mind that we will be doing a giveaway for previous videos. So if you want to win a Instant Speed playmat that is signed by James White, Brian Gottlieb, Chris Gehring, and myself, leave a comment in the video right here and say, what is your favorite memory of Flesh and Blood in 2023? I will be giving away that playmat when the Speedy Awards are published later this month. Thank you so much. And as always, don't forget, you're not losing if you're learning. We'll see you next time on the Instant Speed Podcast.
Well, I work hard. How come everybody wants to shuffle my cards? And I think that it's true. There's nothing of importance on the 6 o'clock news, and I believe that it's how